Welcome. I'm Shelley Cobb, Associate Professor at the University of Southampton, presenting this year's BAFTSS Outstanding Achievement Award to the writer-director Amma Asante. Amma Asante is a multi-award winning writer and director who won a BAFTA for her first film, A Way of Life, in 2004. This made her the first Black director to win a BAFTA Film Award for writing, directing a feature film. Her follow-up movie, Belle, drew widespread critical acclaim. It was one of the highest grossing independent films of the year. And BAFTSS screened the film for our 2019 conference in Birmingham, and I'm aware that it's taught on many modules led by our members. In 2016, A United Kingdom was released, and its European premiere saw Amma celebrated as the first Black director to open the BFI London Film Festival in its 60-year history. In addition to her 2018 film, When Hands Touch, and her upcoming film, The $1 Billion Spy, Amma has directed episodes of The Handmaid's Tale and Mrs. America. In 2017, she was awarded an MBE for her services to film and television as a writer-director, and is a member of the American Academy of Motion Picture, and has been twice elected to the British Academy of Film and Television Arts. It is my honor to serve as the presenter of the British Association of Film, Television, and Screen Studies Outstanding Achievement Award to writer-director Amma Asante. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you so much. This is more than an honor. It's a great pleasure. I don't necessarily always think of my work as the work that people are studying, but it's such an honor to know that in some way that it is, and it has this reach. So I'm so grateful, and thank you. Just thank you to everybody who was involved in making this decision. I can't even speak, this decision. Thank you.
So I'm just going to ask you a couple questions about your work in relation to the themes of the conference, which were part of the reasons that we're thinking in terms of your long achievements, but also the kinds of things and works that you do. So several of your films and the television shows you've directed are historical: England in the 19th century, World War II, Botswana in the 50s and 60s, and American women's rights movements of the 70s. Do you have a particular affinity for stories set in the past, before the 1980s, as many of your works are and will be with the upcoming The $1 Billion Spy? And when directing these, how do you think about the time in which they are set in relation to the time in which you make them in your contemporary moment?
So it's something that comes up often because of obviously the body of work that I've created, and I don't deliberately sort of pick projects that are not necessarily contemporary, but I find that oftentimes they are the ones that are going to allow me to sort of best tell the stories of today somehow that I want to explore. And for me, I've always found that there's something really interesting about telling stories about today and who we are today and how we've become the way we are today, but by distancing us in some way so that we take down any defensiveness or barriers or boundaries, and that we're sort of more willing to sort of absorb the subject and the questions that may be raised by the story that I'm trying to tell. Because it's, you know, some of these stories are hard and they're difficult and they're challenging, and I never really want it to feel like I'm saying you. I always want it to feel like I'm saying us. Who are we? How have we become? What may we be going forward? And oftentimes the best way to do that is to also look back. And so I have, you know, on occasion thought, okay, I'm ready for my contemporary piece now. But inevitably, I always still find myself sort of being led back to a story that is going to sort of better speak to all of those things, really, that I've just mentioned, because of the way that history can access an audience, because of the way that people are often feeling like they're going into the movie theatre or sitting down on the sofa to look at the television screen, to look at who we were and how far we've come. But often, you know, we'll finish whatever the story is thinking, wow, how far we still have to go. And it's harder to sort of present that as a thesis at the beginning, you know, before they even go in, if it's a contemporary piece. Whereas if it's something they come away with, a takeaway, it's a better conversation, I think, to have with an audience.
Yeah, oh, that's wonderful the way you put it, having a conversation with the audience and thinking about trying to set that conversation through the thinking about history, having knowledge of the past. Can I just briefly ask about the $1 billion slide that's coming up? Are you how are you dealing with that particular moment in history, that kind of story?
Yeah, well, so, you know, for a lot of people that will sort of, you know, who look at my body of work, they'll look at $1 Billion Spy and go, oh, wow, that's interesting. Why this film for her? And I think there are many reasons. I think when the film comes out, people will absolutely, it will be so obvious why this fits into my body of work. But in short, I'm really interested in stories that explore the individual versus the collective, the individual versus society, and what that relationship is, what that dynamic is. I'm really interested in the sort of, within that context, in the micro and the macro, okay, so how we operate and how we find out our individual identity and fit within the collective identity. And I think that that period in Russia is a great period to sort of investigate and look at and explore alongside the other sort of periods that I've investigated and explored in my other films. And it sort of does a similar thing. I'm sort of really interested in what identities, when it comes to national culture, means. And, you know, what Adolf Tolkachev tells me from his story, and certainly from David E. Hoffman's book, which is the book that we're adapting, is that Adolf was never looking for the American dream, which was something that was on offer to him all of the time. He was looking for the Russian dream. And that's so much of what my stories are really about. How can we be as authentic as we can be to and for ourselves, and be allowed not to have others supplant who they think we should be or ought to be upon us. And so that's really the story. And it's wonderful to be able to sort of explore it through spycraft and through genre, and through the story of her lens rather than the story through his lens. And although it's his story, I still get to tell it, and there's something that's quite delicious about that for me.
That's wonderful. Delicious. That's great. But that point you made about the individual and the collective, and trying to make think about that and someone making someone's way, and that links to my second question that connected to the theme of bodies. So women's bodies are central to many of the stories you tell, especially in terms of women's legal rights and their rights to freedom, independence, choice, and the call to be leaders, often intersecting with their race and class. Do you purposefully choose women's stories, or do they come to you? And what do you think are the political potentials of making films and directing television that puts women's bodies on the line while also appealing to a broad audience?
I think the interesting thing about the question or the issue of diversity that, you know, comes up so often these days, and is really integral, I think, to so many of our industries, is that it's completely natural for me for these stories to come through me and to be told through me, because they are me. And that's the thing about allowing diverse stories to be told. I perhaps prefer the use of the word variety, maybe, rather than diverse, because that's what it is. It's simply saying, how do we allow stories, often stories that we know so well, often stories that we've seen before. After all, there are only so many stories that really exist out there. But how do we tell stories of our world through the experiences of the people that actually populate the world, and not just through one section of those that populate the world. And that comes because no matter whose story I'm telling or what story I'm telling, if I'm telling the story of two men and $1 Billion Spy, it's always coming through this body. And this body, this woman's body, has a life, has experiences, has responses that are not affected or are not always intentional. Sometimes they are, but they are me. They are what I am. And so you know, for every story that I tell, which absolutely you're correct, involves the autonomy of woman and the autonomy and the agency of woman, and therefore her body, it's because that those are the natural experiences that I'm having, and that's simply the way that I see the world and I experience the world, and the way the world experiences me. And so what do I think is the impact of doing that? I mean, for me, purely the impact is to remind the world and the audience that, you know, that women are 50% more or less of our world. Women's stories and women's experiences and the woman's lens, it is, while we are not monolithic in any way, shape or form, we do have certain moments of harmony and overlap in our experiences, and those experiences are as real as any other experience that exists out there. I mean, the world wouldn't exist as it does without the woman's experience in it, without the woman's contribution in it. And therefore, and despite the fact that, you know, there are definitely areas in which a fight continues to hold on to the reins of that autonomy, if you like, or that agency, or even to access that autonomy or that agency, the reality is the world is the way that it is because women do exist in it, partly, and is a better world for it. And so for me, it's sort of, it's the most natural thing we should be doing, whether it be in business, whether it be in film, you know, whatever area, whether it be in study, whether it be in teaching, whatever the world is that we are accessing the experiences of 50%, and in some countries more than 50% of the population within it.
Yeah, that was amazing to hear you talk about that, and that natural connection between you and your stories. I think sometimes as academics we try to separate those things for reasons, but it's important, I think, for us, especially for women filmmakers, to think about the connection between ourselves, our bodies, and the films. So just to kind of maybe finish up, you mentioned you know, you're coming through your own body, right? These stories and your own experiences. Do you, when making films, do you have a sense of of course you have a sense of yourself, your sense of what it means to put your body on that set, to be the one in charge, to be the director, and the kind of experience that is, or is it something that well, I guess that's my question. Experience.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a bit of both. You know, as I think it probably is for all women in general, and maybe sometimes men too, in the sense that sometimes I'm very aware of my womanhood. Sometimes it's because I'm made aware, and sometimes it's just because I'm actually reveling in it. Sometimes it's because sometimes I'm very aware of my blackness for the same reasons. Sometimes because I'm reveling in it, sometimes because I'm reminded of it, and sometimes that's for positive reasons, and sometimes it's actually for negative reasons on set too. But there are also times when my conscious is Amma, and Amma the storyteller, and of course woman and race makes up all part of that. But I'm sort of so involved in the world of my characters that you know, this sort of you know, being lost in that moment in a way that I would want my audience to become lost in the characters. You know, sort of whether you're a man watching, whether you're white watching, you know, whatever you are, I want you to become lost in the characters that you see on screen. I too have to get lost and step into their world and become a part of their world for it to be as real for you as it should be for me as I'm making it. And so yeah, I am at times aware, and other times I'm not. And I talk about this a lot with my husband. You know, sometimes I'm going to the bank, or I'm just going to the shop, and I'm just sort of going about my business. And I think many of us as women will have experienced this. You'll suddenly you become acutely aware that you are, you know, perhaps different to the person who's serving you or the person who's responding to you. And sometimes that's for good reasons and sometimes it's not. And it's the same really with being on set. I would sort of finish this answer up by saying, however, the fact that I am so rare still, unfortunately, means that, and it's getting a little better, it's not enough, but it's getting a little better, means that we're a long way from a point, I think, where I'm not ever going to be reminded by others, I think, that I'm a woman and I'm different to what many are used to in a leader who is directing them on set. And so we've obviously still got work to do there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know sometimes it can do for other women who are sort of standout unique feel like a burden and sometimes an honor to be the one who's leading the way. But you are, of course, leading the way, which is why we wanted to give you this award and recognize all that you've done for women, for people of color, and for British cinema itself, which is one of the, of course, the key things we think about and talk about in this organization. So I just want to thank you again for being here and for accepting our award.
Thank you so much. And again, just thank you to everybody. I want to just say one last thing, which is so often we sort of, in accepting awards or being nominated for awards, or even when we're just sort of being interviewed, we'll often say, we don't do it for the awards, and awards, don't matter. And the former might be true, but I don't think the latter is. I do think, particularly when you're dealing with areas where opportunity is limited for certain groups, awards make a huge difference. Acknowledgement makes a huge difference. As we know, profile makes a difference, particularly within whatever industry you're coming from. And so I never take an award or a moment of receiving an award for granted. They always make a huge difference to how I go forward and how not just I respond to my career and the work that I do, but how others do. And certainly, no matter how far up the ladder one might get, there are always those times where you think, oh my God, this is so hard, this is so difficult, what am I doing this for? And just having that reminder there sometimes on your shelf, or a memory of the acknowledgement, makes a world of difference. So for all those reasons, I'm grateful to all of you that have chosen me for this award, and once again I thank you.
Thank you so very much.